In this spiritual critique and celebration, I want to discuss some of the pros, a lot of the pros, and some of the cons of one of the more significant relationships of my life, the relationship with the Lazaris material and the channeled entity Lazaris. So I discovered my relationship with Lazaris first at age 12, I believe. And the entry into just the very idea of a channeled entity, I was at the Findhorn community in Scotland at the time, the very idea that there could be a consciousness channeling into the body was something new to me. And it also presented a little bit of a crisis, or a little, a tension, as someone raised in a Christian context. There's a lot of blood and guts and jealousy and stuff around the Christian God. He doesn't like competition. Other gods are false gods. And so to, respect and consider valuing a spiritual relationship with a channeled entity was, on some level, blasphemous, right? And so, I would say Lazaris helped facilitate my transition from a fearful relationship with a Christian bully, right? Because saying you'll be burned alive for eternity if you don't do exactly what I say, that's the words of a bully. To a more open, a more conscious relationship. It's also a more intimate relationship in a certain way, because Lazaris is talking and making videos, etc., rather than being translated multiple times, from books that are thousands of years old. So that was a journey. And Lazaris has been around for coming up on 50 years. I'm 47 as I make this, and Lazaris started channeling through the channel Jack Purcell the year before I was born. So I was born in 1975. Lazaris started channeling in 1974. So it's a long time. And I think it's impressive that, I've watched and listened to thousands of hours of Lazaris channeling on some pretty complex topics. And there are a couple of things that I think are impressive for such a long period of time. One is relative consistency of the material. Meaning, if you read my diaries and my points of view since, for the last maybe 30 years since I've been, writing, there is relative consistency. And I would say that there's at least as much consistency with Lazaris. Lazaris seems to have a somewhat photographic memory, in the sense of being able to go back to, segments of 3-hour recordings in the 80s and quote them word for word, which he does every now and again. But there's a fair degree of consistency in both personality, tone, and message over that 50-year period. I would probably think more than my own consistency of tone and message, etc., over the same period. In fact, I went through a very, deep traumatic crisis in which my tone and message and all that changed tremendously. And so that there's a lot of integrity there. There's a lot, of integration, of consistency there. And I would say that Lazaris has probably had the biggest philosophical influence on my life. I've read various, philosophical books, beginning with Rudolf Steiner and other channeled entities such as Ken Carey, Starseed Transmissions, Return of the Bird Tribes. I was kind of reading those at the same time I was discovering Lazaris, the Seth and Seth material, books and recordings, similar vein. But I would say that the things that over time, like I've gone through kind of just digesting and thinking about, and to some extent just ingesting thousands of hours of material, rejecting and dissociating from a lot of it, and then developing my own point of view, there are a good number of things that, having read 500 books and traveled the world, that I find myself saying that are pretty consistent with some of the things that Lazaris has said. So for things that I've come to that kind of make sense, consistency over time, the amount, the relationship that I've spent the most time with and invested the most energy into, I would say that, the Lazaris material is up there with, anything else that I've done. Now, so I think that's quite an accomplishment. I also think it's a pretty big accomplishment that, to my knowledge, there haven't been any sexual scandals around Lazaris or Jack Purcell. Right? There's plenty of scandal, but there are few churches or personalities that don't have a certain amount of that. The Dalai Lama, I don't think has any sexual scandal around them, etc. But that's nice to see. The energy that Lazaris brings to things such as crystals, right? Watching the videos, etc. It's a tremendous delight. And I know of nothing that I enjoy waking up to as much as the Lazaris morning meditations, or falling asleep to the evening meditations. So there's a unique style and language of meditation that I haven't encountered it in other places. I'm sure it's out there, but I haven't encountered it. And, I really enjoy that. So for humor, for consistency, for a below average level of scandal, and if you look at the profiles of spiritual teachers and spiritual communities, that there is a high level of scandal, and a certain level of corruption and contradiction, and nothing is perfect. And so, looking at the critique side of the relationship, because I would be very proud as a human being if I had had the general impact and brought the quality of material that Lazaris has brought into the world. I mean, it's an impressive body of thought that has, I think, a generally constructive and positive impact. And so, one of my first filters when I was questioning, do I believe or not in channeled entities, is a good way to put that to rest is to, read a book or listen to a lecture or performance, and then just ask this: if I had, presented that, if that was my book, would I think that was impressive, right? Would I have delivered it as well? Would I have, or what about the best speakers of the world, right? So if we just dismiss the idea, is it channeled or is it not channeled? What if it's just a performance by a human being? Would I be impressed? Would I be interested? Would I be engaged? And I find the answer is definitely yes with much of what Lazaris says. So what are the critiques, right? Because nothing is perfect within a three-dimensional environment. Everything has a plus and a minus from a certain point of view. And, I would say that, the critiques are varied and numerous, certainly to my adolescent. The first one being the format. Lazaris presents themselves as a friend, but the relationship, even with Lazaris, quote, friends that have one-on-one, is 99% listening to Lazaris and 1% talking, right? So whether it's a workshop or even a one-on-one conversation with Lazaris, like if you say, Lazaris, what do you think about this? That takes 2 seconds, and then Lazaris may talk for 15 minutes about that. And so even in a one-on-one session, Lazaris is doing, 95% of the talking. And for the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the time, it's a monologue in group format, right? So it's a weak form of friend and friendship. I think the biggest critique is in the gap between the, blissfully exuberant and kind of out there possibilities Lazaris paints, and the statistical probability field within the Lazaris community. So one of the benefits of working a lot within the framework of the Lazaris material is, I've been to more workshops and gotten to know more of the people associated with the Lazaris work who have worked with the Lazaris material for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? Now, I think, one of the biggest questions that anyone has, or in my view should have, if you're kind of exploring a philosophy, a pathway of well-being, a spiritual teaching, etc., is, does taking that path increase one's probability of more sustainable well-being at a lower cost, at a lower quantity of time, money, and natural resources than other paths, right? Because everything has a price in time, in money, and natural resources, and everything has a yield in suffering and or well-being. It has an impact, an influence. And the question is, if you spend $100,000 and, a year of your time and, fly around the country and do things with Lazaris relative to spending a year of your time and $100,000 and stuff doing something else, is your life going to be better because you did that? And the answer is nuanced. The answer is nuanced. For example, I have met former Concept Synergy staff and Lazaris clients who are getting older, who don't have as much money saved up, and regret buying the crystals sold to them by Concept Synergy for 1,000% markup, right? If I just hadn't done that and had put more money into a retirement investment and stuff like that. So, that's, so that's buyer's remorse. in that category, right? And I've met people racking up credit card debt to go to lots of workshops. And they may be in the category of buyer's remorse as they come, older. Because if you have credit card debt, you pay that down first before you save for retirement and things like that. So that's, there's definitely that statistical probability field. I've probably invested around $100,000 in my relationship with Lazaris. And a good chunk of that was buying crystals with the 1,000% markup. And, I have mixed feelings at different times about that. But, would I enjoy having spent most of that money, for example, in Bitcoin or Tesla and seen a 16,000% return? Probably, right? And, so that's, I would say that the investment in the relationship with the material, with the Lazaris, et cetera, is probably a lot better than in Scientology, for example, right? And I would say probably better than the $100,000 I invested in therapy, right? So I've spent over $100,000 in therapy. I would say that overall, what I value today, more of what I value today came from the Lazaris material and that relationship than therapy, which I spent more than the $100,000 on. So it's all relative, right? And, I would say that one of the biggest kind of, I guess, glaring shortcomings is the absence of statistical analysis of impact, right? Because, I've met people that seem dissociatively traumatized and have been in that state for decades while working with Lazaris. In other words, that hasn't healed. The people that Lazaris works with, whether myself or someone else, as a statistic, I don't, for example, I've done business with, I think, 4 Lazaris friends. And let's see, 1, 2, 3. No, I've done business with 7, right? 7 Lazaris friends. So I've done business with 7 Lazaris friends, and 4 of them were among the less professional, less constructive relationships, right? So, if I do work with 100 clients, for example, in landscaping, and then look at that in relationship with the landscapes that I've done for Lazaris clients, the Lazaris clients were more difficult on average than the non-Lazaris clients. And, and that ties in with some interesting narrative that Penny, the kind of person that Lazaris references as kind of their close friend, was, reported to be the worst client that one realtor ever dealt with, who loved Lazaris, right? So I wouldn't say that doing business within the Lazaris community is easier or more professional than the non-community. Probably slightly the other way, maybe a lot the other way. I don't have as many data points as I'd like. And it's I would say that a number of the Lazaris techniques are kind of incredibly convoluted relative to the alternative, right? And so, for example, I did not learn anything useful about romantic relationships with all the Lazaris tapes in that category and stuff. Instead, I went to a series of workshops by humans that were interactive and learned 1,000% more. And that brings me to things, watching long-term Lazaris friends fall asleep because of the lecture format of just sitting there in a chair for hours without the chance to talk rather than do small groups. It seems like Lazaris, their format was not half as engaging and interesting as many other formats that I've seen where you learn experientially and kinetically and faster, right? And the business, concept synergy, the business, it's by no means, for example, as corrupt as something like Scientology. But there is, a wake of disillusioned, unhappy, conflicted concept synergy employees, one of whom just died recently after not getting the traumatic support that she needed after Penny's death from a whole host of health complications, followed by her partner's suicide. Right? So, and so there's a split here also because, Lazaris has commented that if you're living your life well, you kind of have a graceful death when you're ready to die and you just leave your body, right? And he criticized John Lennon fans for saying, that John Lennon was shot because he was so angelic, and that it was meant to be. And he said, no, that's not how people who are so angelic that it was meant to be die. They don't die by being shot. They have a more elegant path of dying. But, Penny died with all kinds of medical complications that had been going on and with, alcohol and, vodka and painkiller, complications. That's not the way to die, according to Lazaris. But if you look at the people who have spent the most amount of time with Lazaris, starting with Penny, you have fractious relationships, several people talking about how difficult it was to do business. There was a whole gossip train where Penny would believe the gossip of friends, but act and then there's an entire control protocol at Concept Synergy to cut people off from whether the forum or the material for not, following all these rather paranoid, user agreements and stuff. If you read the Concept Synergy users agreement, you will find it to be an incredibly paranoid, fear-based, and controlling document, which I would consider spiritual abuse. And Lazaris has chosen, to give Concept Synergy a monopoly of the Lazaris material, right? And so, I think that, the biggest critiques would be Concept Synergy after 48 years of business violates a number of the Lazaris tenets and finds that they work better than what Lazaris says, right? Because whether it's healing the need to control, Concept Synergy likes controlling the stuff, and that works for Concept Synergy more than healing their need to control, their clients. And so there's a fair degree of schizophrenia between Concept Synergy and the Lazaris material. And there's a fair degree of divergence that, one would think that the people that spent the most time with Lazaris and concept synergy would embody the material the most. But that is not at all the case. In some ways, one could say it was inverted. Right? You could say that, so the closest person to Lazaris, Penny, dies of morbid obesity with painkiller and vodka overdose, with chronic medical issues she's refusing to get help for because she's trying to do it in the spiritual way that Lazaris talks about. Then her partner commits suicide. So those are the closest to Lazaris, right? And then the staff, so Barbara Brannan, for example, just died with all kinds of, traumatic complications. She was fired by Concept Synergy, et cetera. Then there were there's another former Concept Synergy person with Huntington's disease and medical issues. Not a very pretty story. So the staff relationship with Lazaris does not seem to bring about either success or money or relationships. In other words, proximity to Lazaris and all the material does not seem to correlate with well-being, right? So there are much happier employees in much happier work and healthier work situations than Concept Synergy employees. And, plenty of people die in a far more healthy way than Penny or the next day suicide of Michael, right? And there are plenty of, more ethical or more competent people than the channel Jack, who works with a lot of the material. And there are plenty of excellent people in the world, and there are plenty of very difficult people that are working primarily with Lazaris. And there's also a long list of wreckage and stuff. And there are, I think Lazaris is the only spiritual seminar that I've gone to where I saw an armed security guard at the door, and it was a private security company hired in San Francisco. And I asked him what he was doing there. And he said, my job is I have photographs of the Lazaris friends who I have to keep out of the workshop. That's what I'm here for, right? Well, Lazaris's whole focus is on creating their own reality, right? They create their reality, we create our reality. That's a lot of bumbles and stumbles and confusions and failures to create if you're Lazaris in a series of friendships. Or if you're, Concept Synergy working with the material with their clients. I don't have to have an armed security guard to keep former clients out from contacting me or getting near my house. And obviously some people do, but is that kind of the best of the best? So, I think that I think all of this is really healthy to look at, and Concept Synergy is more paranoid. I don't know if they're more paranoid than most. Probably not, actually, right? I think that if most companies had a service or a product that was kind of this out there, divergent from the norm, and kind of had various controversies all around them, that they would probably be paranoid of that getting out. And I think that's also understandable. The material, I think it's really good. Now, you could say it's a critique, or you could say it's a compliment. One thing that I noticed, having heard a lot of the Lazaris material, thousands of hours, in my teens, buying all the tapes, before I was widely read, the more widely I read, the more I find that there have been human beings who have said largely what Lazaris has said. But you know, what my opinion is that Lazaris is kind of a clearinghouse for the top 5% of human ideas in a variety of ways. And in many ways, he'll upgrade it, right? So you can read an Enneagram book, or you can listen to a Lazaris tape on the Enneagram. And there will be unique things that Lazaris embellishes and adds to that I think is in the top, 10% for sure. So even if, Lazaris was actually a person, Jack Purcell, who, read 1,000 books and listened to, 1,000 seminars and then organized and edited and upgraded and synthesized, I think they're doing an excellent job with the best of human thought embellished and added to. And so, if I was a human having accomplished that, I would be very proud and do not think I could do as good a job as as I've observed Lazaris, to do. I think that the biggest kind of puzzlement, as Lazaris continues to use, a tremendous amount of hyperbole or enthusiasm to talk about the new world, the miraculous thing, is the enormous gap created from Lazaris's sense of what is happening, what could happen, our ability to create our own reality fully and completely, and people's experience, right? So I have never met I have never met anyone, whether they've been working with Lazaris for a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I have never met anyone, whether it's Jack, Michael, and Penny, or the staff, or any other friend who is doing even 5% of what Lazaris would talk about. Now, I think I do 5. Well, let's say, maybe it's more. I think I do 10% of what Lazaris talks about. That you can learn with joy and healing. You don't always have to learn through pain. I learn a lot through pain. And I'm sure I learn through joy and success, 10% as well, right? 10% of what I learn is from joy and success, and, a lot, but not to the degree. I'd say it's only 10% of the degree that Lazaris talks about. And yes, you're processing and programming and creating your reality, et cetera. Again, about 10%. My health, probably about 10% of optimal. Successes in various areas, probably 10% of optimal. Now, I meet people who are calmer than I am, happier than I am, have more money than I am, are better at relationships than I am, and are enjoying their life more than I am. And, so that's, and I don't think any of them are Lazaris friends. There might be, and I'm sure there are a few, but my point is it's not, one doesn't find the greatest embodiment of the aspirations of consciously creating success and consciously creating fun within the Lazaris community as far as I can tell. And I think that's a pretty big critique. I also don't think it's particularly unique to Lazaris, meaning I don't think the anthroposophical community lives as rich a life as many non-members of the anthroposophical community. I think that there are many non-Christians who don't believe in the Bible and all that live better lives. Certainly the Catholic Church has a higher percent of pedophiles in its priesthood than the average population. If you take a random sampling of 100 men, 5% of them are not active, intense pedophiles, but 5% of Catholic priests are. Regular chronic pedophiles having lots of sex with a large number of usually boys over time. So it is a little bit troubling, right? Join the priesthood and your chance of being a pedophile goes up, or if you're a pedophile, you're more likely to join the priesthood. And I do think there's a certain amount of, because then the question is, how much of that is Lazaris attracting and manifesting that? And how much of that is that the people who are in the most pain, the most trauma, and the most desperation tend to be the strongest seekers, whether it's religiously or in church, etc. Because if you're schizophrenic and your life is falling apart, you can't, figure out relationships, and you're traumatized and you're lonely, and Jehovah's Witnesses come on the door and say, God loves you, this could be the best thing in your whole life. Oh, thank goodness, somebody loves me. Come in, right? And so is that, it is, so then it would be unfair to say that Jehovah's Witness is causing all of that in their members, but rather that more of the stressed people, and similarly, a big recruitment throughout the churches has been poverty. Like, we'll give you a meal if you listen to this sermon, right? Join, get a lunch thing and get free education, but be beaten by nuns for not learning the scriptures, right? So it's a bargain, right? If you're really poor and desperate, you've got to believe what we say you've got to believe, and then you can get some free food and education, and and find some salvation from all your misery. So there definitely is that, right? Even atheistic farmers pray to God for rain when their crops are about to fail, but they don't do it when it's raining nicely. You get the idea. So I don't know how many people came to Lazaris, because if I look at my own story, I came across Lazaris. It was fascinating. It was interesting. It was fun. And then I kind of moved on. But then I got depressed a year later, really kind of dissociatively depressed. And then I came across another tape of Lazaris. And to my great surprise, Lazaris was the only presence, entity, energy, anything in my life that could touch the depression. So that's when I picked up, was like, before it was interesting and this and that, but now it's like, this is significant. My parents are not as effective as Lazaris in this important area. None of my family is. None of my teachers are. In fact, I do not know a single human being who can nourish me in this terrain. And so that was the point when I clicked and said, this is important. I'm going to focus on this, right? So, but what does that mean? What that means in some ways is if my life had been going swimmingly, when I saw the Lazaris tape again, it wouldn't have stood out because I'd have had great relationships here and great relationships there and great relationships over there. And then if Lazaris was a great relationship, it would be one of many. So it wouldn't have gotten the priority that it got. And so I do think that the deeper the wound or the deeper the pain that a faith or something like that is able to do something with, the more attached, the more devoted, the more I want to do more of that is the response. Now, what this would naturally bring up is that the most devout Lazaris friends, Christians, Buddhists, whatever, were in the most pain, which correlates to trauma, which correlates, of course, to dysfunctional culture and family, before. And so if, for the people that find me difficult, unreasonable, weird, whatever, for them to blame Lazaris because, I'm not living the Lazaris material or living a great life, that could be a wrong, an unfair attribute. On the other hand, Lazaris has said that the ultimate law, the ultimate causation is resonance causation. And he talks about the scientific principle of the two metronomes. If you put two metronomes together, they will eventually vibrate at the same frequency. And Lazaris has said that they are operating at the highest resonance that has ever touched the planet. There's a little bit of a red flag there, right? Because there's all this competition for the highest, the biggest, the best, right? The one true God, right? And so, I don't care for that assessment, that claim, as much as one of many, for example. So Lazaris has said that they're the highest resonance to ever touch the planet. Now, this is also, somewhat political. In fact, Lazaris has said that the ancients, the sages, spoke politically as well as philosophically. And Lazaris may be doing that too, because, if I come to you and I say, watch my videos, but they are not as good as Byron Katie's videos. They're not as good as the Lazaris material. They're not as good as the Seth material. They're not as good as Tony Robbins. They're not as good. In fact, here's 500 people, and listening to me is not as good as any of those 500 people. Well, then, what are you doing listening to me rather than those people, right? You see the problem? So if spiritual teachers say, I have the 10th resonance, there's this resonance, Buddha, Jesus, whatever, they're up there and there, and then I'm down at 27. Well, 27 is a phenomenal accomplishment if you could truly objectively say that this was the 27th most inspiring, brilliant, anything. Like if you could date the 27th most beautiful woman in the world, or the 27th richest person, in the stereotypes at least, you're not doing badly, right? But in teachings with books and philosophy, like in a marriage, once the first person is married, right, or the So, Miss Universe, already married, Miss this. And so then you get down to Miss Arkansas, right? And that's not bad because, the other ones are married and, hey, it's not bad to be Miss Arkansas, right? But then with spiritual teachings and philosophy, there's an unlimited amount of books that can be printed. Billions of people could all be part of one faith, one teaching. That you could have 1 billion people all agree that this was the most important book, and everyone else could still join them. In fact, if you really thought that this was the book, right, everyone just ought to read that book. And why waste time with other books, right? And this is a little bit of the sentiment in the Lazaris community. We've found the best. Why try something else? And that's definitely a criticism of the Lazaris community, right? Because most of what has been most rich and rewarding has been outside of the Lazaris community. And so it's unfortunate that there's some of that snobbishness. But I think it comes, naturally, that although there are, you can watch something like Krishnamurti on YouTube and he'll say, nobody should listen to me. And then they all listen to him all the more. But what Lazaris says is we're the highest resonance. The universe is all about resonant causation. And we're not going to come down to your level. So if you spend enough time with us, basically, you're going to have to come up to our level. Because all resonance in the law of resonance ultimately vibrate at the same frequency. So this tells the story that the closer you get to Lazaris, the higher your resonance. And the higher your resonance, the more beautiful, good, and true is your life. So it's particularly concerning when just about every past Concept Synergy employee who used to have monthly sessions with Lazaris, got cancer, Huntington's disease, doesn't have a pension, is disgusted with Lazaris, now is dead. That's not saying that they stepped up to Lazaris's level, right? But then again, maybe those that are closest started off in the most worst place, and maybe they'd be dead sooner, right? So you don't know that, but the statistics are not great. Now, I don't know what the statistics are for Tony Robbins and stuff, but I certainly think that the people, I think that the people in, and I'm not even sure of that. I'm not sure if the people in Tony Robbins' circle, for example, are healthier or happier than the average person down the street. I don't know. I know that the accomplishment is higher. Things like Landmark Forum Est and Tony Robbins, etc. Your accomplishment is much more likely, like Tony Robbins hangs out with billionaires. But are they healthier? Are they happier? Do they like themselves more? Do they have a better inner and outer lifestyle? I think sometimes yes. I mean, it's. I think it would be wonderful to learn what that is, but it's definitely not the case with Lazaris. I don't think Jack, the channel, has a higher resonance or anything than the average person, in some ways less, or Penny or Michael or the staff, or the people that have worked with Lazaris the longest. I don't think I have a better resonance or anything like that. And so it's an interesting, thing. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for all that I've learned. I'm very grateful for the energy. I have a lot of admiration and, just joy for what Lazaris has brought into the world. And my life is better, I think, in many, many ways because of the Lazaris material. If I was to guess, I know that there was like a 20 or 30% shift when I did the inner child work that I learned with Lazaris. So that's a good 20% better life than if I hadn't found Lazaris. I also know that I was close to suicide in my teenage years while I was listening to the Lazaris material, and that the Lazaris material helped me kind of take off out of that. So I was in massive amounts of pain, and some of the shame, etc., was contributed by Lazaris saying, you're creating your own reality, and then having all this childhood abuse going on, with apparently me creating that, right? So, Lazaris introduced me to goals. What a great thing. Goals improved my life 400%. Lazaris introduced me to crystals. Crystals played a significant role in healing my first wave of chronic fatigue. Lazaris taught me a lot about shame and contracts of abuse and all of that thing, which was going on as I was a teenager in those dynamics, which was really great. I think Lazaris taught me about developing principles and values, which I think have played a huge part in my life. And at the point when I was evaluating whether to kill myself or do this or do that, the meditations that I was doing with Lazaris and the journaling and the routine and all that, I think may have played a significant part in the tipping point. To decide not to kill myself at that time, and also not to get heavily involved in substance addictions, which when there's that level of pain, there's a tendency to do various things to manage the pain. And in my case, it's been writing and therapy and Lazaris meditations rather than, drinking and lies and gambling and things of that nature. So I think, that could have played a key role in that. And the ability to think and talk things through, and a high standard for articulation, and a general instinctive kind of framework for understanding a lot of things in general terms. I think that my life is 30% better than it would have been without Lazaris. And so that's not bad. Now, and I would also say that, the $100,000 investment, a lot of that was, time off work and airfare and hotels, right? And then, the events. The tapes themselves, not that expensive at all. And certainly now doing a streaming account, you've got the onerous, ogres of concept synergy asking you to sign, an incredibly bizarre user agreement in order to access this material that talks about dominion and love and ending the need to control and not dominating and excellence and all this. It's, that's laughable. Concept Synergy is the only company that I have ever heard of, that other than maybe Scientology, that wants you to agree to get written permission from Concept Synergy to say the word Lazaris, right? Now, I'm a free man because I didn't sign the agreement, but I'm not on the streaming platform because I think that's spiritual abuse, right? I'm using the cassettes where you never had to sign an agreement to, like, this whole thing is illegal. This what I'm doing right now, according to Concept Synergy, if I sign the user agreement. You cannot have free speech, basically. And Lazaris has whole tapes on domination, control, paranoia, all this stuff. Creating your own reality. Concept Synergy doesn't believe a word of it. They're the biggest paranoid, company out. And how do you bring those two together? You sell all this product talking about freedom and the excellence and this, and you manage to be severely substandard in massive ways, right? And Lazaris is, of course, creating that in their own paradigm, because Lazaris's biggest message is you create your own reality. Lazaris creates universes, right? So this is very funny, and it's just very funny. Then again, Lazaris obviously chose to channel through Jack among all the different people that Lazaris could channel through. I think Lazaris could have made a much worse choice than Jack. Maybe he could have made a much better. I don't know. I mean, because we have the paranoia of concept synergy to deal with. So those things are just what they are, right? Now, I don't see those as that different, though, than anything else, right? You have me making these, quote, more in-depth and philosophical videos, but being, a complete moron in other areas of my life, right? So the fact that I talk about certain things that, are, deep or, thoughtful or sensitive or whatever, doesn't mean that I'm able and willing to embody that in all of my life, right? I'm anxious and paranoid in some things. I self-sabotage in other things. I'm incredibly critical with my crew. I get triggered almost instantaneously with certain client behavior. So, in other words, what I'm saying in all of these explorations or my books do not, I would say they're aspirational, right? They're not a reflection of what I've mastered and gotten to. They're often a roadmap for me to follow, right? And I would say that's the biggest thing I get out of this is, I finish a presentation, a book, whatever, and I think, gee, my life would be a lot better if I did more of what I just said there. And it is, right? My life gets better when I take action based on my own advice. And then it seems to help other people, as well. And so, if is concept synergy more schizophrenic? Well, I think so, because the channeled, right? Lazaris kind of talks as if this isn't happening, which is a little odd, right? Because he's nested within the monopoly of concept synergy by choice. So there's a little bit more schizophrenia between, what Lazaris says and what concept synergy does, than, what I'm doing here. Although I guess it just depends. I don't always mention in every video that, that this is aspirational for me, as opposed to, something that I've mastered. And so, that's my, that's my critique of probably the biggest influence of my life, the Lazaris and the Lazaris material. And, if I hadn't bought, $40,000 of crystals with 1,000% markup, and spent as much time in hotels and traveling, which was quite fun, by the way, because I didn't used to take vacations and travel, but this was for spiritual purposes, so I had to do it. So I went to Disney World a lot and loved it, because that's where they held the workshops that I attended, was in kind of Orlando. So, that was fun. And if I hadn't done that, it's probably only a $5,000 investment in all the Lazaris tapes that I've bought. And the highest impact was actually through doing the inner child work, which was just, my life got 20% better because of a $30 tape. And I think a lot of that is true to this day. And I've also passed that on to other trauma survivors. And so, that's not bad. So I'm grateful. I'm glad that Lazaris is here. Some of what you'll find me saying on this channel was either sparked by or first shared to me by Lazaris. It's an incredible body of work. I'd give Lazaris 9 out of 10 for oration skill, 10 out of 10 for more useful things to talk about than not. There's a lot of things to discuss, and Lazaris's choice of topics I think are pretty good. Consistency in tone and all that, 9 out of 10. But there really isn't anyone that that I would give much higher marks to. There are niche people, like there's people in certain areas where I've learned a lot more from, but this is a pretty neat overall body of the work, and I think the world is a better place because it exists. And like anything, I think that monitoring the dose is the main thing to be aware of, right? To live a rich life outside of Lazaris. I'm glad that I've done that. I will continue to do that. If you would enjoy exploring a relationship with Lazaris, you can go to YouTube, and there's a video that somebody posted. It's the one of the free videos that Lazaris gave, and I think it's a great introduction. There might also be on YouTube the Complete Guide to Channeling with Barbara Marx Hubbard, the Lazaris interview. I think that's also a really nice one. I would be delighted if your life took, an upward turn because you discovered Lazaris as a result of, listening to this. And I think you could do a lot worse. And hopefully, I think the biggest counter force around the Lazaris material for me was shame around not doing it all right. You can get so lost in the endless amounts of tapes and techniques. And hopefully this kind of deflates some of that anxiety and all that by pointing out some of the many imperfections around, the material, the format, it's a little dicey talking about a friendship when it's a paid, when you have to pay for every exchange with your friends. That's, I think always a little bit dicey. But I think it's well worth it, and good luck.